apparently featuring my kitten in like half of my Instagram posts anymore was not enough, and I decided to make another video. So a little while ago, I introduced my little boo to you guys, Hamlet, and I talked about when my husband and I first got him and sort of like first impressions and first challenges and things like that. But I didn't actually talk too much about how we prepared, at least not very much in detail. Hamlet is my first pet that I've ever owned myself. That's not like a family pet, but I've actually spent a lot of months. For several months, my job was basically almost entirely devoted to cats. So I did tons of research and writing and stuff like that. Even though I've only ever had experience personally with a cat, I grew up with a dog, but again, that was a family dog, not my dog. I really feel like a lot of these tips and these like prep things that I'm going to talk about can apply to basically any pet you want to adopt. You just have to sort of like tailor it to whatever pet you want. So I thought today what I might talk about is some of the ways that I prepared. So basically kind of a checklist that I made myself. And yes, I did actually make a checklist because I love lists. We've covered this before. But basically a checklist of what you need to do and what you need to prepare before you adopt a pet. Okay, so I'm not sure he's gonna let me hold him the whole time, although he seemed pretty content there. But let's just put you down. All right, now he's gonna take a nap in my lap apparently. He's very, very cuddly. Anyway, this is my personal checklist. It's what I personally recommend. It's by no means exhaustive. There probably actually were other things that even my husband and I did to prepare that I've just forgotten to write down, but I've taken as much time as I possibly can to try and remember all the stuff I went through. Also keep in mind, I am not a professional. I don't do this for a living. I did do a lot of research and writing, but not specifically about adopting. I'm not an adoption professional or anything like that. Also, like I said, depending on what type of pet you're adopting, some stuff could be a little bit different. So just keep that in mind. My personal example will obviously be using my kitten. The first thing on the checklist, but not necessarily the first thing you'll be doing, is to figure out all of the pickup details for your pet, and also any other details you might need from the person or the shelter where you're picking the pet up. In my case, I went directly through a family to adopt Hamlet, but if you're going through a shelter, there's probably actually a more standardized procedure where they tell you all the things you need to know and they go through all the details and everything like that. There might be even a visiting period afterward. I think a lot of shelters will come and visit maybe a week or two after, just to make sure it's a good fit. But you need to make sure you work out all these details before. So when you're gonna pick them up, where you're gonna pick them up, whether they've been vaccinated or what vaccinations they've had specifically, if they're fixed or not fixed, how old they are, their birth date, stuff like that. Just all the details that you might ever need from the family or from the shelter. Obviously you can reach out and get in touch later, but it's just best to have those things all narrowed down right when you get there. You can write it down, you can have all the information you need. Once you have a pickup date, you can also know when you need all these other things that I'm about to talk about and when you need to have everything ready. So next are supplies. Now this is something again that's going to vary a lot, especially based on the pet, but one thing you'll probably need is a carrying case, no matter what kind of pet it is. I also recommend you think in advance. So for example, our cat, we knew that he was probably gonna be a little bit big. His mom was pretty big. That's why we specifically picked out a carrier that hopefully will be big enough even when he gets grown, and it's definitely big enough now, and it's bigger than what a lot of people get for their cats, but it's because we're gonna need the space. You also need to decide if you're gonna get a bed for your pet. In our case, we got a cat tree because cats need some place to climb and some place to scratch. Scratch and post, definitely really important for a cat. Toys, definitely have a few toys. Obviously you can continue to add to the collection, especially as your pet destroys all the wonderful toys you bought them, like Hamlet loves to do with all of his toys. But have a few different types of toys, have a few different types of treats and things like that. We got a nail clipper for him, brush, a lot of different animals need a brush, just basically any little supplies like that. You can do a bit of research. If you've had this pet before, you probably already know, or maybe you even have these supplies, but you just need to make sure you have these supplies on hand. Some of this stuff you can just buy afterward. You don't necessarily have to have everything before. Like for example, the nail clippers, I forgot to get those before we picked up Hamlet, but it wasn't a big deal. I just ordered one, we had it there by the time we needed it. But it's better if you can have the stuff in advance just so everything's ready, and so when you actually get your pet there in your home, you can focus on helping the pet adjust and getting to know the pet and not just like scrambling for all the things that you probably should have had before. There are lots of really helpful lists too. If you just Google what do you need to buy before adopting a cat or adopting a dog or adopting a hamster or whatever you're adopting, and you'll find tons of lists for information. Another really, really, really important thing to figure out before you have the pet is the food. So I probably actually should have mentioned under the supplies list, you need some like a food and water dish, but the food that you actually put in their dish is much, much more important. And it's definitely something you need to have before you take the pet home. This probably can apply to other animals as well, but I know cats specifically, I know this having written articles about it, cats have a really tough time changing diets. You can do it, and you should do it every so often just to make sure they don't become one of those cats that gets really sick whenever you change anything. But they have a really hard time, even the most, changeable of cats. So it's very important to try and figure out what they were eating before. You can just change their diet to whatever you want, but me personally, I specifically asked the family what they were feeding Hamlet, and I got that food so that I could transition him onto something else, and I could do it very slowly. He actually did really well. He had no trouble whatsoever transitioning to the new food, but cats can get ill from the new food. They also can just turn it down and not eat. So just keep that in mind. If you're adopting a cat and you can figure out what they're eating before you bring them home, that would be the ideal. If you can, it's also very helpful if you can figure out how much you should be feeding them. There's a little bit to be said for sort of experimenting and figuring it out, but if you can actually figure it out based on like a weight chart, for example, I know for cats there are some charts you can find for their weight associated with how many calories they should be having. But if you're getting a cat or a dog or whatever else that's not full-sized, this is probably going to change a lot. Next, it's very important to make sure you have a pet-proof home. Now, growing up with dogs, this was a lot simpler. You didn't have to worry about stuff that was up on high shelves. You didn't have to worry about tiny little corners and holes, behind desks and shelves and things like that. None of that was you had to worry about. You just had to make sure, like candy canes on the Christmas tree were hung really high and stuff like that. But with cats, and I would imagine animals like rabbits, for example, would be quite complicated as well, there's a little bit more of a challenge. The first day that we brought Hamlet home, he managed to find a little hole in the back of one of our cabinets in our kitchen, and he sneaked underneath our cabinets. I'm not talking about like in the cabinets towards the back. I'm talking a place that you're not even supposed to go, like underneath the cabinets. And it took us probably a good hour to get him out. It was an absolute fiasco, and it ended up with both poor Hamlet and me covered in dust. So I don't want to really repeat that. That was after I had cat-proofed the home, because I didn't even notice that was there. That was after I'd already put up things I thought he could get into and made sure the plants that we had weren't poisonous to him and all of that. And he still managed to do that. So just to forewarn you, make sure you really, really think it through. Even if it seems extreme, just pet-proof it anyway. If you haven't had the type of pet before, this is going to be an even bigger challenge, but just do your research and try to figure out what things could possibly be a problem. So like I mentioned, plants. There are tons of plants that are poisonous to cats, dogs, I'm sure rabbits, and any other animal as well. So just do a bit of research. Make sure you don't have any of those things lying around. Also, there are certain foods that certain animals shouldn't have, so just make sure those aren't lying around. I really recommend you start this early on, like several weeks before you're going to adopt the pet, just so you can slowly realize the different things that might be hazards. You have plenty of time. You don't have to focus all in one hour and think, what in my house could possibly be a problem? Just gradually start changing your lifestyle and moving around your things to where it will accommodate to your pet. The last thing is going to kind of grow with you as you have the pet, but I think it's really helpful to prepare in advance as well. But that is your pet parenting style. I've never had a kid, but obviously having a human child is a little bit more trouble than having a pet. But there are definitely some similarities when it comes to where your pet is allowed to go and what they're allowed to do and how they're allowed to act. That's a little bit like having a child, and you have to figure this stuff out. You might be thinking that you definitely have to wait to have the animal to be able to do this, but that's not completely true. Stuff like deciding where your pet can and can't go is very important to establish from day one, from hour one, because, for example, if you don't want your cat up on your kitchen counter, you need to enforce that rule from the very start. Every time they get up, you take them down, because once you let them get up multiple times and they think it's okay, it's going to be really hard to change their habit. They've already thought of it as their own. If you let your pet sleep in your bed at night, if you let your pet up on the couch or on certain chairs or in certain rooms, if you have a house with rooms, unlike any place in Paris, basically. But if that applies to you, you just need to make sure you figure this stuff out in advance, and I would consider this all sort of associated with parenting style. Once you actually bring your pet home and you have them there with you, obviously you're going to learn a ton about their personality. You're going to learn basically how to be a pet parent to that particular pet, because everyone is different. Even amongst the exact same breed and the exact same age, each individual pet is going to have their own things that they're curious about and that they like to do, and their own ways of responding to you, and you're going to learn what works best with them. But if you just do a bit of research in advance and you're prepared for what might be the problems, then you're going to save yourself probably a lot of headaches later. All right, so those are all the things that I wrote down. I really, really hope I didn't forget anything important. If I did, I will leave it in a comment below, or I'll leave it in the description box, actually, more likely. So make sure you pop open the description box for any other little details. I really hope this video has been helpful for you guys. If you have any tips of your own to add, please do, especially if you're a long-time animal owner and you have a lot more experience than me. I would love to hear your personal tips. And of course, anytime you want, want, you can tweet me pictures of your animals. I will love them. Doesn't matter what kind of animal they are, what kind of breed they are, how old they are, what color they are, I'm gonna love them. And if you want to see more pictures of Hamlet, there are tons on Instagram, and there are always tons more to come. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys soon.